Welcome back. So now we're going to talk about the ear. The ear houses two of our special senses, hearing and equilibrium. The outer ear extends from the auricle, right here, all the way to the tympanic membrane. And it includes this external canal, this external auditory canal, which has special protective mechanisms. So it has cells that produce earwax, or these cells are called ceremonious glands. They produce cerumen, which is the earwax. And what earwax does is it protects us from any microbes that are living in our ear, so they can't grow and cause infection. It also protects us from insects or anything else trying to burrow into our ear. We have little hairs in our ear that keep dust and other debris from our ear as well. Our middle ear extends from the tympanic membrane then to the oval window, and it includes this long auditory tube called the eustachian tube, as well as our three auditory ossicles. The auditory tube, known as the eustachian tube, functions in equalizing the pressure of the middle ear. So as sound waves move in, they hit on this tympanic membrane, the vibrations move through the three auditory ossicles and then into the inner ear. But those pressure waves have to come out, and they come out through an oval window, and then the pressure is released through this eustachian tube into the nasopharynx. The three auditory ossicles, our malleus, incus, and stapes, vibrate. So they take the vibrations from the tympanum and move it to the inner ear, where our receptors for hearing and equilibrium are found. Sometimes people get infections of the middle ear. An infection of the middle ear is known as otitis media. And what happens is the fluid, typically in the ear, builds up. Most often because that eustachian tube is running horizontally instead of running vertically. This figure here that I'm circling, it's not even a word, circling, is the ear of a child, and they tend to have horizontal eustachian tubes, while adults tend to have vertical eustachian tubes. It's easier to travel from the throat, from the nasopharynx, to the middle ear and have infection occur. In this case, not in this case. Does that make sense? And so typical procedures to protect children, oftentimes they have tubes put in. And there's a video here that you can actually watch if you want to, of having tubes put in. So this is what an ear infection looks like. What's happening is you're getting a buildup of fluid that's not draining down, and so it's causing the tympanum to bulge. And if the tympanum bulges enough, it can actually burst, and then you have pus and blood potentially coming out of the ear. So treatment for this, they just take a tiny little tube, they cut the tympanum just a small amount, and then they insert the tube into the tympanum. Once they've done that, the procedure is very fast, and usually it lasts for at least a year or two. I'm sorry, whoops. Wow. Usually it lasts a year or two. You may have to have tubes put in a couple of times during childhood, but then as the child grows taller, the eustachian tube moves more vertically, and then you're less prone to infections. The inner ear is where we tend to focus most of our time in this class, because it's where we have the receptors for both hearing and equilibrium. So the inner ear is found within the temporal bone, And you learned about the temporal bone last semester in chapter 7 and 8. It has a bony labyrinth, which is the bone itself, and then it's the spaces in the bone that are filled with a tissue called the membranous labyrinth. And between the bony labyrinth and membranous labyrinth, we have fluid. So inside the membranous labyrinth, we have endolymph. Outside of the membranous labyrinth, we have perilymph. And so I have the same picture here showing this. This is the inner ear. So we have the actual bone making up the bony labyrinth. And then inside we have the membranous labyrinth, the blue. And then outside here, between the bony portion of the temporal bone and the membranous labyrinth, we have perilymph. And then inside the membranous labyrinth is the endolymph. So the inner ear has 3 parts to it. It has this cochlea that looks kind of like a snail shell. And then it has a vestibule, which kind of reminds me of the snail head. And then these semicircular canals. I don't know, snail eyeballs, or I don't know what you want to call them. That's just the end part. The cochlea is the site of hearing. Vestibule and the semicircular canals are the site of equilibrium. Vestibule specifically is the site of equilibrium associated with linear acceleration or static equilibrium. Semicircular canals, equilibrium associated with angular motion or dynamic equilibrium. So let's look at the cochlea a little closer. If we open the cochlea up, we'll see this thing called a spiral organ. This is a spiral organ. Here's another spiral organ. We have these throughout the cochlea. And it's this region that is responsible for hearing. So the spiral organ contains a basilar membrane and a tectoral membrane over the top. Hair cells stick into the tectoral membrane, and when the basilar membrane starts to flutter because of vibrations, the tectoral membrane which is sitting up here, is going to get moved, and the hair cells that are embedded in the tectoral membrane are going to bend one way or the other. So here's that basilar membrane. Here's the receptor cells for hearing. And here's the stereocilia that are embedded in this tectoral membrane. So as this moves, the hair cells are going to be bent because of this tectoral membrane. And then electrical impulses will be sent down this cochlear branch of the vestibulocochlear nerve and move to the brain, and we will interpret that as sound. So here's just the basic sequence of stimulation. Sound waves move in, they hit the tympanic membrane. They're going to bounce off the tympanic membrane and move into the middle ear, vibrate the malleus, the incus, and then the stapes. That's going to cause vibrations to hit the oval window, which will send information into the middle ear. Once it moves into the middle ear, we're going to cause the basilar membrane to start fluttering because of the perilymph waves. So the basilar membrane starts to flutter. The hair cells that are embedded in the tectoral membrane are going to bend, and that's going to send a signal, an electrical impulse, to our brain. The vibration, or the sound vibrations, the pressure is going to exit via the oval window back into the middle ear and then move out through the eustachian tube. The last thing we talk about then is equilibrium. And I'm actually going to make one more video on equilibrium because I want to make sure that I get all of equilibrium together. So I'll see you in a few. Bye.